Hi guys, the last time I posed this question, my crypto doubled within 10 weeks and my portfolio was up 1,000% within 6 months. So could it happen again? Before we go forward, I just want you to check the date of this particular post. This was November the 20th. This was less than 3 weeks after an initial webinar I hosted, and I'm going to go through that in a minute. And 3 weeks later, when I made this post, our clients were up over 40% profit in 3 weeks, and they started to get twitchy. That's what this was about. So I'm going to go through, quickly review what I talked about at the time and what's happened. I'm also going to explain to you why I think Bitcoin is likely to move forwards, possibly quickly again, maybe not as quickly as last time, but probably fairly quickly. So I'm going to explain all that to you. This was the webinar title. I hosted this first one on October the 20th of 2020 and the second one on October the 28th, a week later. And as I said here, I believe that investing in crypto could be the best financial decision of your lifetime. I talked about why leaving money in the bank wasn't a good idea. I talked about why Wall Street, the big banks, were now getting involved because they could sniff a very big profit, and that the government was likely to create its own crypto. And now 3 years later, we know that the CBDC, a government crypto, is well underway. I talked about 3 top crypto buys, and folks who attended the webinar who didn't even join us would have made over 800% just from the 3 top currencies that I explained to them in the webinar, and I'll go through that with you in a moment. Now, a few other things I want to show you in this. I talked about at the time inflation. This is 2020, October. I explained why the money printing and the fiat currencies around the world and what the Fed had been doing and all the other banks in printing money out of thin air was likely to devalue those currencies, and inflation would become a big problem. A month earlier, in September of 2020, the Federal Reserve said they expected interest rates to stay near zero through 2023. How's that going, lads? In September, they also said they were going to try to push inflation up to 2%. Well, they did do that. They managed to achieve that target. Well done. If you haven't realized by now, those at the top of the food chain either tell lies or they are stupid. You make your own decision which that you think that they would be. On a serious note, one of the other things I explained at the time was about banks, having money in a bank. You may think that because your government in America has guaranteed 250,000 of your savings, or 100,000 in Europe, or 85,000 pounds in the UK, your money's safe. Well, in 2013, when Greece and Cyprus got into a financial mess, the EU instructed the bank to steal money from taxpayers. That is a fact, and that is within the EU. So if you've got cash in the bank and you think like with SVB that they're going to bail you out all the way, think again. SVB was a unique situation. There were some companies and individuals allegedly had billions in there, so it may well be that there was a political consideration for why SVB guaranteed, or the Fed guaranteed, more than the limit. Other things I talked about, how Americans were banned from buying gold in 1933, had to sell it back to the Federal Reserve at $20 an ounce, and if they didn't, they could go to jail for 10 years or a $10,000 fine. I then went on to talk about the fact that the big boys were coming in and why they were coming in. And the blockchain is a big part of this. The blockchains, I explained at the time, were actually as important, if not more important, than a lot of the tokens, because it's the technology, and the technology, the adaptation has increased dramatically. The CFTC chair at the time was in favor of crypto, whereas Gary Gensler is doing his best at the moment to destroy it. Grayscale were one of the early ones that were allowed to actually have a Bitcoin trust. And JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, called Bitcoin a fraud in September 2017. They were vehemently against it, as are the central banks, because they're losing control. However, by 2019, JP Morgan announced they got their own cryptocurrency. 2020, JP Morgan is now the bank for Coinbase and Gemini. And also in 2020, Morgan says Bitcoin's looking mostly positive and cryptos more broadly have longevity as an asset class. Why? Because suddenly the big funds and the banks could get their noses in the trough. I said at the time, remember this is the 20th of October when Bitcoin was at $11,500. I said that it could hit 40 to 50,000 if the big funds came in, and that happened within 3 months. And that has advanced since. You also have now the latest ones on this is Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. And in 2017, he said that Bitcoin was an index of money laundering. 2020 changed his mind a little bit because he was talking about how the young people, millennials, were thinking of getting involved. Now he's talking about the rich and educated investors are trying to want to get into Bitcoin, and I'll explain why in a little while. And that is also part of my reasoning why I believe that Bitcoin especially is going to continue to grow, and it could be quick and significant in a relatively short space of time. Not necessarily as brilliant as it was for those of us in it in 2020, but I do think it's something you should certainly consider to be part of your portfolio. Finally, before we move on, this was an update at the end of November, early December, that those who had joined me had they'd seen an increase from the 28th of October from 13,000 to almost 20,000, and a lot of them were starting to get twitchy. The beta testers who joined us were at this point up 140% in 5 months, and that is what the post I showed you earlier was all about. So this was that post. This was November the 20th, and I spoke here about the beta testers. Well, the ones that joined us the month before were up 40%, and I said tongue-in-cheek, I told you, and those who had joined me back in May were up 120%. I then talked about the fact that because I was convinced about Bitcoin, I was in it to buy and hold, and said at the time if it gets to 20,000 I would probably take some off and look to buy the dips, and I did that all the way up. So that's what this post was about. Now, going back to my top 3 coins at the time, Bitcoin on the 20th of October, Bitcoin was at 11,600, and the beta testers who joined us starting on the 11th of May, Bitcoin was at 8,050. By January, the 11th of January, Bitcoin had risen to 41,000. So bear in mind, if you've got in here and it's gone to 41,000, understandably you get twitchy. Ethereum was even better. The beta testers got in Ethereum around 180, and by January that was at 1,200, and eventually Ethereum had you stayed in through till May, which was only 6 months after my webinar, May, Ethereum hit $4,350. The final one was Cardano, and Cardano, for those on the 20th of October, was at 11 cents, and the beta testers were lost out on this one. It was at 36, so it was a wild ride. But those who got in October, by March was up 1,100%, and if you rode it all the way, it was up to 2,500% in the October. So within a year, it was up 2,500. I say our average portfolio at this point was up 1,000%. We were buying on the dips and we were taking profit on the way. And you'll notice it's the same template I use for trading FX. So why am I still confident in 2023 about buying Bitcoin? For members who want to watch that original video all the way through, you can watch it in the members area. It's under crypto. This week I hosted a webinar. I talked about what's been going on in the crypto world, about XRP and about Bitcoin, why I think it's still attractive. So let's give you a quick whiz through of that now. Now, if you're not familiar, XRP has been hammered by the SEC. XRP is Ripple, and remember Ripple. And this week, part of the judgment has gone in favor of XRP. However, it was not as clear-cut as first thought, and the initial surge did pull back significantly. But XRP Ripple is an important part of what's coming with the CBDCs, and I think that this means they're probably more likely to settle. If they don't, this could still drag on for years. Now, why is Bitcoin so attractive? Well, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in circulation, and we are now up to 19.5 as of July 2023. So there is a limited supply. That was always part of the interest with Bitcoin. There's even more limited supply now because the amount available to buy on exchanges is limited, and the recent dips that we've been seeing, 3.8% of Bitcoin supply last moved at 30.2, so 30,000 is still holding, and 30,000 was very significant on the way up. You can see here technically in January of 21 it was major support, and then after it dropped and the big pullback, it then was major support in all through from May 21 right through till the end of July. And when it came back down again, it hovered around here, broke, and now it's back up there again. So it's a highly significant area. Spoke about BlackRock. Now he's got a responsibility of BlackRock to democratize investing. The hypocrisy of these people. Anyway, because of their involvement and because of the fact that eventually you would think they are likely to get permission to run a spot Bitcoin ETF, then that gives me more confidence that eventually that Bitcoin will become important to wealthier investors. There is another way to get involved in Bitcoin. You could buy stocks, and you may have seen in recent weeks that Riot, one of the mining companies for Bitcoin, has surged from around $10 up to 20, so 100% gain in recent weeks. This is Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who both say Bitcoin is worthless and rat poison and a delusion. And yet in February 22, Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway invested $1 billion in a crypto-friendly new bank. Another one is MicroStrategy. Now, MicroStrategy holds 152,000 Bitcoin. If we have a look at who's been invested in MicroStrategy, you can see all the big names are in there. You've got JP Morgan, Charles Schwab in here. You have Goldman Sachs, Vanguard, etc. So there are indirect ways to be involved in Bitcoin at the moment as well. I mentioned earlier about CBDC. This is a central bank digital currency, and this should scare the pants off you once you realize the significance, and most people do not. And I will put the link to this article under the video for you to check out and have a read. Now, how does it work? This explains in this graph what's going on. It also means that for those who hold shares in smaller banks in the USA, this may be a deliberate act at the moment that smaller banks will be absorbed by the likes of JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and the big boys, because there will be less of a need for smaller regional banks if the CBDC comes in. So that could be significant for your stock portfolio. This explains how it works. The downside, the worrying thing, is the control that governments will have over your money. And if they don't like your politics, for example, in the UK, there's been a big hoo-ha this last few weeks because Nigel Farage, who politically was behind the Brexit movement, has just been defunded by his bank. They initially lied and said that because he didn't have enough money in his account. It turns out it's because they don't agree with his stance politically, and he is politically active. And therefore, if, for example, Trump, at the moment he's under investigation for numerous offences, if the current government decided to freeze his bank accounts, that would make life extremely difficult. So you just need to be careful. Canada did it before. They did it with the truckers last year, as well as those who they thought were supporting the truckers. But it was fiddly for them to do. They have to get onto the banks and freeze individual accounts. With the central bank digital currency, they can do what the heck they like. Going back to Ripple, I mentioned earlier, Ripple, their technology is recognized to be some of the best blockchains out there. And ironically, they are now creating a platform for central banks, which gives me a little bit more confidence that the CFTC will eventually settle with them. Another thing why I believe Bitcoin is going to become important, if you are wealthy and a central bank digital currency comes in, then the banks, the central bank, can take whatever they want. And when you've got extremists like Bernie Sanders, who is wanting to tax companies in the US up to 95%, and also wants to take 100% of anybody who has more than $1 billion, then you would understand why anybody with a decent amount of money would be scared and will be at least thinking of alternate methods, and crypto is outside the noose of central bank digital currencies. Another thing to bear in mind is that if you owe money to the tax man, well, at the moment the IRS can only take money from your bank account if they've gone through a process of chasing you and you've argued it and fought over it. Now in future, it's not unreasonable to be expect that governments could take it first and let you fight for it afterwards. And as the old adage goes, 99% possession is 90% of the law, then it could be very difficult to fight them to get your cash back. On a simplistic level for the man in the street, if you get a speeding ticket driving to work this morning and you then get a summons later on and then you may or may not pay it, and this is an example in the UK, I think 10% of speeding fines were cancelled. Well, in future, they'll just take it. So educate yourself about what's going on. CBDCs to me are quite scary, very scary in the current economic climate and political climate that's going on, but all of which gives me confidence that Bitcoin will continue to grow, and I will be looking to invest more in Bitcoin on pullbacks, and I will let you know when I do. If you like this video, please like and share it and subscribe to our channel.